Hey everyone! Tonight we are exploring the appetite of a true legend, Alex the Great. The man who conquered half of the known world before turning 33, tamed wild horses during his teenage years, effortlessly founded cities as if he was playing an ancient version of SimCity, and still had to choose what to eat each morning. Was it roasted lamb served in an ornate bowl, boiled lentils eaten inside a battlefield tent, or simply whatever food did not escape quickly enough? Before we dive into his royal meal, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I share here. Also, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who is tuning in at 2 o'clock in the morning while eating cereal straight from the box like a true war commander. Now, lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for a gentle background breeze, and let's settle into this adventure together. Before he was Alex the Great, he was Alex, eat your porridge. Long before his empire was built, his conquests spanned the globe, and his passing was mourned across 3 continents. Young Alex of Macedon began his days like any other noble boy, with a morning meal that was intensely healthy and oddly tough to chew. Imagine a cold Macedonian dawn. The sun has not risen yet. Aristotle is still asleep, but the kitchen buzzes with the sound of barley boiling and people convincing themselves it tastes better than yesterday. Breakfast for young Alex probably included boiled barley gruel. This is simply a courteous way to describe a hot, slightly salty porridge. From time to time, it might have been enhanced by a splash of goat's milk or, on special occasions, a dried fig that appeared as if it had endured some form of hardship. Alongside this steaming bowl of mild despair, there would have been bread, likely made from emmer or barley flour, coarse in texture, and fundamentally opposed to any kind of softness. This was the sort of bread that seemed to stare right back at you, held grudges, and could even serve as a blunt weapon during moments of political unrest. Olives would also make an appearance, because nothing truly captures a childhood breakfast quite like bitter, oily fruit soaking in brine. If fortune smiled upon you, and by fortune I mean being born into a royal lineage with at least one living parent, you might receive a slice of goat cheese aged to the point where it could defend itself and clear your sinuses from across the room. To wash it all down, there was wine. Yes, even for a child. However, do not get too excited. It was heavily watered down, almost like purple water. The Macedonians believed that consuming pure wine was a sign of barbarism or poor judgment among poets. This may sound modest, and in some ways it was, but it was not because the Macedonian court lacked resources. No, Philip II, Alex's father, intentionally brought up his son in a culture of restraint. There was no indulgence, no comfort, only calories, protein, and the mental preparation of a man who would one day consume field rations in Persia without hesitation. So no golden luxury for him. Pancakes were absent, no luxurious eggs. Benedict, only mush, olives, and bread so heavy it could support a crumbling pillar. Breakfast marked the first victory of the day. Picture sitting down for your meal, and right across from you is Aristotle, philosopher, scientist, and the ultimate killjoy when it came to excess. You just want to savor your barley bread and perhaps a fig, but he is there delivering a profound lecture on moderation while eating his lentil stew. Alex, during his teenage years, was not only learning swordplay, but was also educated in ethics, logic, rhetoric, and likely which foods would make him too sluggish to dominate Asia. As a follower of Plato and advocate of balance in all things, Aristotle took it upon himself to ensure Alex's body and mind were nourished equally, though probably not with the same enthusiasm. Mealtimes transformed into moments for personal growth. If Alex reached for an additional piece of cheese, Aristotle might raise a skeptical eyebrow and mention how overeating dulls the spirit and thickens the intellect. Those were interesting moments. Yet, this was not mere strict food judgment. Aristotle truly believed nutrition played a crucial role in molding strong leaders. Too little food left one feeble, too much caused decadence, but somewhere in the middle was the foundation for an empire and a resilient physique. It is likely Alex learned to distinguish between nourishment for energy and food for vanity within these lessons. Simple legumes, such as lentils, were thought to benefit the soul, a concept worth admiring. Considering their flavor, they often felt like a letdown, unless heavily seasoned. At the same time, anything excessively sweet, spicy, or extravagant was regarded with distrust, as if it might corrupt your values and leave you reclining in velvet by the time the sun set. There is even some irony in how food served as a means of education. While most children learned the alphabet by carving letters into wax tablets, Alex was likely quizzed on what Hippocrates thought about the proper balance of wine and whether figs stirred up improper thoughts. This approach to diet stayed with him even when Persian dishes tempted him with their finest offerings. Lamb prepared with pomegranate glaze and rice so aromatic it seemed forbidden did not often sway him. Alex usually stuck to simple fare: bread, meat, water, and occasionally a few olives if the occasion was special. So no, dining with Aristotle was not a joyous experience, but it was influential. Alex didn't just master the art of conquering cities, he also learned the discipline of refusing seconds. And in ancient Macedon, that was a key part of leadership. If you have ever packed a lunch filled with love, hope, and exactly one slice of stale bread, congratulations. You might already have the skills of a Macedonian field cook. The typical midday meal in ancient Macedon was not about taste, but about survival. It was designed to keep one from collapsing under the scorching sun while yelling military commands. Alex's daily noon meal before campaigns would have been so simple, it bordered on harshness, consisting of a tough piece of barley or emma bread that had hardened with time. The bread was as hard as ceramic tile. This was the kind of bread you had to earn the right to chew, ideally with a dagger and a prayer. Accompanying this crunchy staple of the meal were a few local delicacies: goat cheese that traveled well but smelled as if it wanted to challenge you, and onions, which were almost considered a food group in Macedon. Onions were believed to boost strength and stamina, and apparently bad breath diplomacy. You might also find a small pouch of figs or dried dates, depending on the season and whether the supply caravan had escaped being devoured by wolves. These fruits served as the ancient world's version of dessert, chewy, sticky, and bearing a texture somewhere between leather and regret. For protein, there could be salted or dried meat, usually goat or beef, occasionally wild boar if they had just raided a wealthy target. It was not juicy or tender. Instead, it was the kind of meat daring you to choke on it and come out victorious. And what did they drink if fortune smiled on them? Diluted wine. Otherwise, it was lukewarm water from a leather flask which had spent most of the day steeping in sweat and saddle dust. Refreshing indeed. It is important to note that Alex ate the same food as his soldiers. He did not request exotic spices or grapes peeled by hand. No, he sat on the ground, tore off a piece of rock-hard bread, and chewed like a man trying to inspire an empire with nothing but jaw strength. So when you think of a Macedonian lunchbox, do not imagine a charming bento set. Instead, picture a rough burlap sack filled with enough calories to keep you barely alive, functional and tough, much like the man himself. Having dinner with your father would already be tense as a teenager. Now picture your father as King Philip II of Macedon, a ruler who managed diplomacy, warfare, and at least 7 wives as if it was a competitive game. Welcome to mealtime at the royal table, where the food was hearty and the conversations could result in banishment. Philip's dinners were probably impressive by Macedonian standards, but far from the excess seen in Roman feasts. His meals included thick roasted meats, lentil-rich stews, boiled grains, and a jug of wine that had witnessed many moments. The king was famously fond of his drink. Historical records gently describe him as a heavy drinker. That is ancient biographers' way of saying your dad was drunk again. Alex, on the other hand, often drank very little or nothing at all. Not because he disliked wine, but because Philip had a tendency to mix politics with drinking, and young Alex was already strategizing around him like a little general. Nothing kills your appetite like watching your father negotiate a military alliance between bites of burnt lamb, all while the conversation remains intense. Military advisors argue about borders, poets recite verses between spoonfuls of stew, and philosophers casually hurl insults at one another in ancient Greek. Meanwhile, Alex quietly eats, observing everything. His schemes and plans aim to eventually surpass his father in power, which he truly accomplished, by the way. Every so often, Philip would return with unique ingredients or dishes sourced from various regions of the Greek world. Spiced fish, sweet pastries made with honey, or unusual herbs that made your tongue tingle. Alex sampled these delicacies. He offered courteous remarks, but consistently returned to the fundamentals. Bread, meat, wine. Sturdy, reliable, and practical for empire building. The emotional atmosphere during these meals was complex. Let's just say therapy had not been invented yet. Philip served both as a mentor and a constant source of frustration in Sandals. Their bond was a mixture of affection and fierce competition. On one occasion, Alex even left the table abruptly after Philip insulted him while intoxicated. That shows how tense their interactions could be. And this occurred before someone attempted to kill Philip with a spear. In short, dining with his father was a crucial experience. It honed Alex's political awareness, strengthened his determination, and likely instilled a lifelong preference for peaceful meals with fewer dangers. Now, let's shift focus to Alex while traveling. Not just any journey, but the kind that traverses scorching deserts, icy mountain passes, and sometimes over the burning ruins of defeated foes. What was served for lunch along this challenging path? A hearty portion of desperation paired with tactical sustenance. The provisions in Alex's army were not designed for taste. They were intended for survival, mobility, and ideally to avoid causing harm from their own food supplies during the middle of March. Imagine a linen sack packed with barley bread, onions, and dried meat. These were ingredients suited for travel, long-lasting and rather tough in texture. The bread was dense, hard, and lacked flavor. If you managed to chew it without damaging a tooth, you were considered ready for duty. Such loaves served many purposes, as eating tools, makeshift shields, and in some extreme situations, as emotional comfort objects. When warmed over a fire, the bread could nearly be mistaken for something edible. If cold, biting it was closer to crunching a stone. The meat, when available, was salted beyond all recognition. Goat, lamb, or beef was cut thinly, sun-dried, and salted until it was more mineral than flesh. This wasn't jerky. It was ancient dental endurance testing. Despite its toughness, it preserved well, and if soaked for long in water or wine, it might even become pliable. Onions and garlic were constant companions, not because they added enjoyment, but because they were inexpensive, strong in aroma, and thought to enhance stamina. Nothing communicates readiness for battle quite like breath so fierce it clears a hallway. For hydration, diluted wine was preferred. Not enough to cause intoxication, but just enough to mask water that tasted like worn leather and regret. Plain water was seldom safe, especially when you were 700 miles deep into Persia, where the local streams were often sources of curses. There were rare exceptions. Occasionally, after a victory, Philip allowed a feast, roasted animals, flatbreads with herbs, and wine that did not resemble boiled vinegar. Sandals were uncommon and always came with another grueling march afterward. Comfort was never a pursuit for its own sake. It served as a temporary relief before facing harsh reality once more. So, yes, field rations were far from gourmet, yet they sustained you, kept you alert, and fired you up just enough to challenge the next empire. And Alex, he ate the very same meals, not out of necessity, but because he believed no man should have better provisions than his soldiers. Imagine this. You have been trekking for days under scorching heat. Your sandals feel like painful leather mistakes, and your throat seems as if it was cursed by Helios, the sun deity. Suddenly, a soldier discovers a small puddle, not a spring nor a clear stream, just a muddy pool, likely home to frogs, and collects water using his helmet. Now here comes the memorable historical moment. That soldier offers the water to Alex, the king above kings, the Persian army slayer, the world conqueror. Alex just gazes at the water, expresses gratitude to the man, then empties it onto the ground for all to see. This stands as one of the most legendary and dramatically dry incidents in Alex's life. Not because of what he drank, but due to what he refused to drink. Let's take a moment to consider why a helmet was used. In ancient times, cooking utensils were optional, but helmets were essential gear. They acted as drinking vessels, bowls, head protectors, and even emergency chamber pots. Practical, multi-purpose, though not very hygienic. Alex's act was not about quenching thirst. It was a form of theatrical expression that conveyed far more than words ever could. Morale was the objective. If Alex, the most powerful man on earth, refused to drink until everyone had access to water, then even you, the lowly soldier suffering from sunburn and trench foot, could endure as well. Was the water safe? Most likely not. Ancient armies were not exactly equipped with modern filters, but that was not the point. With a single decisive gesture, Alex transformed dehydration into a form of team unity. It resembled a corporate trust exercise, only much dustier and involving more sandals. This story took hold and became legendary. Authors such as Arrian and Plutarch were captivated by it because here was a leader who did not command merely through tactics. He led by sharing hardship with his men. He was hungry alongside them, he marched with them, and when the only water looked as if it came from a donkey's hoofprint, he still refused to drink before his troops. It was truly brilliant. Anyone can share a lavish meal, but refusing to drink alone is a powerful act of emotional solidarity. So next time you complain about lukewarm bottled water, remember that Alex once looked at a helmet filled with tepid frog soup and said, "No thanks. I will wait," and his soldiers admired him deeply for it. Conquering an empire comes with its rewards, one of which is improved food. When Alex entered Persia, he was not only welcomed by trembling aristocrats and deserted palaces. Instead, he encountered feasts so indulgent they made the humble Macedonian bread seem like pebbles wrapped in a cloth. Persian cuisine was no joke. These people introduced the world to dishes such as rice pilaf, the fragrant spice saffron, and rich stews. Lamb served with a pomegranate glaze and nearly 47 kinds of sweets, all resembling honey-infused treats, created a vivid image. Their royal feasts were masterpieces, with golden plates, sparkling crystal vessels, and exotic fruits carefully layered in pyramid shapes. The quantity of roasted meats was enough to frighten an entire woodland. Then there was Alex, the king known for his plain porridge and thoughtful self-control, entering this extravagant food extravaganza. It was akin to placing a Spartan inside an ultra-modern grocery store. Did he give in to temptation occasionally? Sometimes he did. He was not without human desires. Accounts suggest he sampled the saffron-infused rice, pastries stuffed with dates, and wine so potent it almost deserved its own chart. Yet generally, his meals remained unexpectedly simple. He stuck to staples such as bread, meat, and water, rather than luxuriating in jewel-adorned stews or figs sprinkled with gold dust. This was more than just his taste, it was a deliberate message. For Alex, excessive indulgence was a sign of weakness, and weakness in his eyes led to the downfall of kingdoms. While Persian aristocrats relaxed on silken cushions enjoying stuffed quail, Alex was still eating his reliable barley biscuit, probably hoping it carried a bit more meaning. Still, he allowed his soldiers to partake in the lavishness. After enduring countless years of dry conditions and boiled goat, they deserved several nights of revelry. Roast lamb, barbecued fish, and honey cakes were presented on plates so elaborate they seemed to require inheritance laws of their own. However, Alex remained prudent, aware of the fate that befell rulers who let extravagance take hold. A soft stomach made for a poor defense. On the battlefield, Alex was not entirely unsusceptible. Certain Persian elements, such as rose water and cinnamon, reportedly found their way into his meals. After all, adding flavor was no act of betrayal. So indeed, Persia offered a lavish spread, and Alex tasted it. Yet in the end, he continued to eat as a man with vast deserts to cross and enemies to pursue, harboring a strong suspicion of anything too fancy on the plate. Alex never actually shared a meal with Philip III, but without a doubt he dined because of him. Having followed the Persian king across Asia like the most relentless food courier imaginable, Alex eventually acquired more than a kingdom. He took over an entire royal culinary operation. This was an enormous kitchen enterprise, unlike anything else. Philip III did not travel with just a small group of cooks, but with hundreds of chefs, bakers, spice specialists, and food tasters, whose job was essentially to consume the food first to ensure it was safe for the king. It was less a simple camp and more a gourmet military caravan worthy of Michelin stars. When Philip III fled and abandoned his dining tent, Alex stepped into a realm of extravagance, previously reserved for immortals and fragile egos. There were plates gilded with gold, tables heaped with slow-roasted lamb, saffron-infused rice, grilled fish wrapped in fig leaves, and sauces aged longer than most Macedonian warriors. How did Alex respond? Like a man raised on onions and doubt, he sat up straight, alert and unimpressed. He reportedly disregarded the couches and ate quietly while everyone around him relaxed and tried to avoid eye contact with the intensely focused conqueror. No slouching, no lounging, simply chewing with intention and perhaps a hint of judgment. This was not disrespect. It was a deliberate message. Alex was determined not to be mistaken for a Persian prince playing dress-up. He wanted everyone, especially the former Persian nobles now awkwardly pledging their loyalty, to understand that he remained Macedonian, still disciplined, and fully capable of overturning the table if things became too soft. However, it would be unfair to say he did not enjoy the variety. Sources indicate Alex embraced certain Persian dining traditions, like multiple courses and occasionally indulging in floral-scented wine. He was not above savoring exquisite food, but he certainly did not depend on it. So, no, he did not dine with Philip in the conventional way, yet he sat in Philip's seat using Philip's silverware, surrounded by Philip's frightened chefs, which in some strange way was even more satisfying. After all, vengeance is best served on a golden platter accompanied by roasted goat and political control. Alex the Great was renowned for numerous qualities: tactical genius, relentless ambition, and conquering the world before reaching the age of 33. But tonight's feast featured wine, an abundance of wine, plenty enough to make the goddess Diana say, "Perhaps take it easy." Despite his usual restraint, there were moments, rare, dramatic, and somewhat sorrowful. When Alex fully indulged in the goblet, one of the most notorious events unfolded in Persia. The victorious leader, surrounded by opulence and many admirers who agreed too quickly, hosted a grand, extravagantly lavish feast. What was on the menu? Most likely, an overwhelming array of Persian specialties including roasted lamb, rice pilafs, spiced fruits, date syrups, and wine flowing as if it owed a debt. The evening featured long toasts filled with emotion, perhaps dramatic recitations of Homer and tears over Achilles. Then came the infamous moment. After numerous rounds of increasingly hazy diplomacy, Alex, reportedly intoxicated, yet still commanding, chose to set fire to the royal palace at Pepilolis. The reasons? Historians remain divided. Some suggest it was a symbolic gesture, others argue it was revenge, while a handful believe it was a drunken dare pushed by equally inebriated friends. You know how it happens. A bit too much fermented grape juice, and suddenly you are destroying a world marvel. Alex awoke with what must have been the ancient version of a hangover and a slightly scorched empire. This could be the earliest recorded instance in military history of regret following wine. This was not a unique example of drunk leadership. Other tales describe fights erupting after banquets, including a tragic night when Alex, in a drunken fury, killed his close companion Cletus, the very man who had once saved his life in battle. That particular evening closed with vomiting, tears, and a crisis of existential proportions. Just another typical Friday in Babylon. The takeaway here is that for a man so fixated on control, alcohol was his one clear vulnerability. The greater his achievements became, the harder it was to stop the wine and flattering companions from overflowing. So indeed Alex drank occasionally to excess. And in those moments he was neither king nor deity. He was simply a very drunk man with a poor sense of proportion and, unfortunately, access to torches. The march into India was not merely a political strategy. It presented a culinary challenge for Alex and his weary troops, who survived primarily on flatbread. They had crossed blazing deserts and traversed freezing mountain ranges. Now they stood face to face with spices whose names they could not pronounce, and creatures resembling siege towers adorned with tusks. From a culinary perspective, India was an eye-opener. This land offered lentils, rice, ginger, turmeric, tamarind, and enough heat from chili to transform a Macedonian soldier's helmet into a steam room. Ancient accounts, though unclear and somewhat amazed, describe how the army discovered entirely new tastes, including curries, aromatic stews, and vegetables that were not merely boiled to dullness. Alex is said to have embraced these flavors. Despite his preference for simplicity, he was curious, flexible, and just self-aware enough to recognize that disrespecting local cuisine would be unwise while still officially invading. He sampled their food. He honored their customs. He, however, never mastered cooking. That task remained firmly someone else's responsibility. His soldiers, in contrast, did not adapt so easily. Macedonian warriors were accustomed to simple fare such as meat, bread, and a general air of grumpiness. When faced with seasoned lentils and unfamiliar fruits, suspicion arose, sometimes escalating to loud protests that frightened even the elephants. Stories say many troops began to long for the humble barley stew, if one could actually call barley stew enjoyable. Then the elephants arrived, not as food, but as formidable foes on the battlefield. Alex, always practical, likely glanced at a war elephant and said, "All right, we are not eating that, but we are certainly employing a few." Still, Indian hospitality offered a feast of richly spiced dishes, goats slow-cooked in fragrant seasonings, fried pastries, and sweet date delicacies. Even though Alex stuck to modest servings, he could not overlook the boundless generosity presented to him. In fact, some accounts suggest he sent portions back to his army as a way to boost morale, which in old general terms means, try this and stop complaining. In the end, India broadened more than just the empire's geographic reach. It expanded their palates, their capacity for spices, and their readiness for unexpected bathroom breaks. For a man who once considered a salted onion a hearty meal, this was real growth. You may conquer Persia, march across Egypt, enter India, and dine with monarchs, but ultimately, the lentil will always catch up with you. For Alex, no matter how far he roamed or what challenges he faced, this truth remained constant. Numerous lavish banquets were offered to him, yet he repeatedly returned to the culinary equivalent of a simple gesture: boiled lentils. Modest, straightforward, and textured, they were somewhere between mushy gravel and comforting warmth. With a hint of doubt, lentils became his guiding dietary principle. Was this because he truly adored lentils? Probably not. No child imagines ruling the world one day while eating lukewarm legumes. However, lentils were practical, nourishing, and most importantly, politically neutral. They did not proclaim luxury, did not spark jealousy, nor did they trigger diplomatic conflicts. They simply existed like sandals, or the most dependable but unremarkable advisor. In a realm filled with exotic dishes and perilous feasts, lentils were a safe choice. They did not originate from questionable sources, did not need translation, and certainly did not cause palace fires. Refer to Wine in Chapter 9 for that story. For a ruler who rested with a dagger beneath his pillow, such simplicity in food was perfect. Lentils had long been a fundamental part of Greek and Macedonian cuisine. Rich in protein, easy to preserve, and cookable with only a pot, fire, and minimal demands, they were ideal. Add a splash of vinegar or oil, perhaps a bit of crushed garlic if feeling indulgent, and voila, the ancient equivalent of being too exhausted to cook. Some evidence suggests that even in Babylon, where an abundance of spices, roasts, and delicacies were available, Alex still preferred simple fare, with lentils always included. This was not punishment, but rather a philosophy, a sign of humility and focus amidst extravagance. Self-control and perhaps a subtle show of status played a role. Alex could have enjoyed quail glazed with honey and wrapped in delicate gold leaf, yet he chose soft brown lentils instead. It is quite possible that lentils brought him memories of home, of training sessions in the Macedonian highlands, shared meals with Aristotle, where food came paired with lessons on ethics, and of military camps where the only constant was the quiet sound of chewing something slightly melancholy. So indeed, the lentil returned quietly, not with grandeur, but with a calm drop into a wooden bowl, as Alex, ruler of half the known world, lifted his spoon and ate, because even the greatest among us require fiber. When you picture royal treats, you might think of grapes peeled by unsteady servants or delicate pastries arranged on silver platters, while a harpist performs emotionally intricate melodies nearby. Yet for Alex the Great, snacking was far from theatrical. Most often, snacks were eaten while riding horses, overseeing sieges, or casually redrawing the maps of the known territories. Convenience mattered above all else. The quality of a snack was determined not by taste, but by its ability to endure being tossed into a saddlebag or accidentally stepped on by a horse, still remaining edible. Enter dried figs, olives, roasted chickpeas, nuts, and dense chunks of aged goat cheese so solid they could be used as makeshift projectiles. These were the ancient equivalents of granola bars, compact, tough, and emotionally detached. Dried figs stood out as favorites. Portable, sticky, and loaded with natural sugars. Energy. They provided Alex with a rapid surge of endurance, which proved useful when capturing cities before noon. Olives were salty and oily, often leaving stains on your tunic during inconvenient diplomatic occasions. But hey, they were packed with electrolytes. Roasted chickpeas, on the other hand, served as the ancient equivalent of popcorn. Crunchy, gratifying, and abundant, although sadly lacking any butter. Nuts, especially almonds and walnuts, offered protein, fats, and something to gnaw on while deciding whether to traverse yet another mountain range. Alex's commanders probably carried similar provisions, sometimes wrapped in cloth or stored in small leather pouches. No plastic containers, no sealed bags, just dusty finger foods passed around during breaks between battles. Naturally, there was always road dust, not meant to be eaten, but practically impossible to avoid. Everything was coated with it, the bread, the meat, the figs. It explains why ancient armies remained lean. They were constantly crunching sand while convincing themselves it was seasoning. Some tales even mention that Alex, although having access to finer foods, often chose to eat like his soldiers. He did not want to seem aloof or spoiled, preferring to snack on goat cheese while perched on a rock alongside his men. That is ancient military relatability at its finest. So royal snacks were far from luxurious. They had to be sturdy, practical, and seasoned mostly by their surroundings, which for Alex tasted like ambition, dust, and the occasional fig. Every empire experiences moments of extravagant dining, and Alex's campaigns were no exception. Although his everyday meals tended to be both sensible and visually pleasing, special feasts often took place, especially to celebrate victories where the atmosphere became unusual. Not just a simple pass-the-salt kind of odd, but more along the lines of a fire-breathing dancer on stage kind of bizarre. These victory celebrations combined diplomatic spectacle with indulgent overeating. Persian nobles struggled to hold back tears into their golden napkins. Macedonian warriors questioned if the honey-glazed lizard on their plate was a prank. And Alex presided at the center, striving to prevent the gathering from erupting into chaotic, wine-inspired conflict. These banquets featured roasted creatures far too large for one table, heaps of rice soaked in pomegranate juice, bird-shaped pastries, and wine served by attendants adorned with more jewels than clothing. The entertainment was vivid, including live music, poetry recitals, acrobats, and sometimes even an elephant or two performing symbolic acts that felt both meaningful and mildly intimidating. Yet the true madness ignited during the toasting rituals. According to Macedonian customs, drinking was not merely accepted, it was weaponized. Guests vied to outdrink and outpour heartfelt speeches. The sequence began by honoring Alex and escalated until someone dramatically claimed they would sacrifice themselves for his sandals, tears falling onto a lamb leg. One of the most legendary feasts where things spiraled out of control happened in Samarkand, where Alex attempted to blend Macedonian and Persian customs by inviting both cultures to celebrate together, united on equal footing. A wonderful concept, yet a logistical challenge. Language differences, cultural clashes, and the contrast between Persian cuisine with its rich sauces and Macedonian food, where salt was a luxury. It was only a matter of time before a dish was thrown in frustration. Occasionally the oddities were accidental, like when Alex held a banquet in a city freshly taken over that still carried the scent of smoke, or when guests arrived bearing lavish offerings such as live peacocks, honey-glazed camel reportedly, or a dessert so complicated it demanded 6 attendants and immense patience. These banquets went beyond dining experiences. They served as political displays, unity demonstrations, morale enhancers, and at times, warnings about the dangers of letting the Thracian get too close to the wine vessel. Certainly, Alex knew how to host a celebration, though he often ate moderately, drank with caution, and observed everything closely, like a man aware that history was constantly being recorded. By the moment Alex arrived in Babylon, he was more than a monarch. He had become a worldwide figure whose menu now blended Greek, Persian, Indian traditions, and even the mysterious roasted delicacies from Bactria. Babylon, naturally, welcomed him with grandeur. And by grandeur we mean banquets that put Olympic opening events to shame. This was the pinnacle of his culinary adventure. Babylonian cooks excelled in extravagance, boasting access to grain-fed lamb, spiced date wine, and expertly prepared dishes. Fruits accompanied by endless sauces were always presented with flair, often served on something resembling gold. Meals arrived in several courses, enriched by music, incense, and a subtle aroma that hinted at either triumph or fatigue, perhaps both mixed together. Alex's dining experience had turned into a grand geopolitical occasion. Around him sat Persian governors, Indian envoys, Greek military leaders, and likely a philosopher or two, all trying to hide their discomfort with the taste of cumin. Despite such grandeur, Alex usually ate plainly. He avoided overeating and did not indulge excessively in sweet treats. He maintained his traditional diet of bread, meat, and occasionally some wine, even as extravagant dishes like peacocks stuffed with dates were carried past him. This was a mix of self-control and political signaling. Yes, I dominate the world, yet I remain grounded enough to chew jerky like any ordinary soldier. Then came the final gathering. Historical accounts differ greatly since ancient writers were not keen on accuracy, but it is widely accepted that Alex attended a huge banquet, possibly to honor a deity, a companion, or simply to celebrate surviving another day. There was plentiful food, an abundance of wine, and sometime afterward he became ill. Was it poisoning, a viral fever, malaria, or liver failure brought on by years of intense rule? The truth remains a mystery. What is certain is that Alex was bedridden for 11 days, unable to speak, eat, or get up. The man who had conquered continents struggled even to swallow water. There are no detailed records of his last meal, but it likely was not extravagant. There might have been a cup of wine or simply a moist cloth pressed to his lips. Ultimately, the ruler of vast empires met the fate common to all humans. Quietly, modestly, and perhaps hungry. Thus concluded the grand celebration. Thus ended the man himself. And in Babylon, the tables of celebration were cleared away as history took its rightful place. Now imagine just for a moment that Alex the Great found himself transported into the present day, his weathered cloak drifting behind him, somewhat bewildered by escalators, and standing patiently in line at a modern food court. What would he choose to eat? Make no mistake, Alex was no man for frivolity. He did not waste time on hesitation, nor did he believe in customizing meals piece by piece. He would quickly survey the offerings, fusion tacos, vibrant smoothies, everything deep-fried, and most likely settle on something straightforward, easy to carry, and rich in protein. He would bypass sugary, trendy treats and head straight for a lamb gyro, appreciating the roast meat turning like a tiny battle chariot. Barley-based energy bars would feel familiar to him, as would lentil soup, a comforting dish from his past. Grilled onions could make the cut, but only if their aroma evoked memories of conquests and reckless decisions. Fast food might confuse him, yet the precision and speed could appeal to his sense of military discipline. The idea of food being ready in less than 2 minutes would seem like magic in Macedon, although he might insist on examining the kitchen and possibly taking control of it. Faced with a modern menu, he would have many questions. For example, why is this called a Caesar salad? Was he not attacked in the Forum? Why is this general called a chicken? Which army did he lead? And upon sampling a milkshake, he said, "This is delightful." What creature did you milk to extract sugar? In terms of health, he would probably flourish. His original eating plan, low in carbohydrates and involving walking 20 meters before breakfast, was already ahead of its time. Paleo? He practically created it. Keto is just a seasonal trend. Yet, despite all these innovations, it is likely that Alex would still long for simplicity. A flatbread, some roasted meat, and a glass of wine, naturally mixed, as he was not uncivilized. No flashy cupcakes, no avocado toast, and certainly nothing served in a mason jar. Why? Because Alex was more than a man driven by hunger. He was a man with a mission. Food served as fuel, a means to an end, sometimes a morale lifter, but never the center of attention. So when you find yourself uncertain about what to choose, simply ask, would Alex eat this or conquer it? Suddenly, that lentil wrap may not seem so dull after all. In the final era of the ancient world, when the brightest minds from around the Mediterranean gathered under colonnades to debate the mysteries of the universe, a woman named Hypatia was at the heart of it all. Born approximately in the year 360 in the intellectual hub of Alexandria, she was not expected to lead, not by the standards of her time. Yet there she was, not merely engaging in philosophy and science, but leading the discourse with extraordinary insight. Her father, Alex, was a well-regarded mathematician and philosopher connected with the famous Museum of Alexandria, a hub of knowledge that still carried the fading legacy of the once great library. While many fathers focused on teaching their sons to read and ride horses, Alex dedicated himself entirely to his daughter. He educated Hypatia in arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and the philosophy of Plato. She did more than simply remember ideas. She challenged them, debated their merits, and taught others about them. By the time she became an adult, Hypatia had surpassed her father in intellect and influence. Her lectures attracted learners from across the empire. Pagans, Christians, skeptics, and zealots all gathered to hear her. She taught openly in public squares and academic halls, wrapped in her philosopher's cloak, drawing attention not through command, but through clear explanation. She described the movements of the heavens, the nature of conic sections, and the qualities of numbers with such insight that many regarded her as almost divine. Hypatia was far from a hidden recluse secluded in dusty study rooms. She moved confidently within the male-dominated environment of late Roman Egypt, advising city leaders and even Roman governors. She represented the classical world, the old order, which was rapidly disappearing under the pressures of religious change and political upheaval. However, Alexandria was no longer merely a city of knowledge. It had turned into a conflict zone for competing faiths. Christianity was on the rise, pagan traditions were declining, and political tensions simmered beneath the surface. Growing increasingly perilous beyond any kind of equation, Hypatia's renown, her autonomy, and her role as an emblem of classical rationalism started to provoke jealousy and hostility from those who valued divine revelation over human reason. Despite this, in those initial years, she remained untouchable. Hypatia represented the last beacon of a dwindling epoch, admired not because she conformed to the male world, but because she rose well above it. At a time when society expected women to marry, have children, and avoid intellectual spaces, Hypatia took a radically different path. She embraced a life devoted to intellect. More importantly, the city of Alexandria allowed this to a certain extent. Her mere existence challenged convention, but her brilliance made it difficult to dispute her. Hypatia was not struggling her way into scholarly circles, she was invited in. Her expertise in mathematics and astronomy placed her among the leading figures of Neoplatonism, a philosophical school merging Plato's teachings with mystical elements. This included profound ideas concerning the soul's journey, the essence of ultimate reality, and the connection between the physical and the divine, all articulated with mathematical accuracy. Her lectures were far from dull academic routines. Hypatia held a captivating reputation. Students traveled from not only Alexandria, but all parts of the empire, eager to learn from her. Many were Roman men of high status who, paradoxically enough, gained knowledge of logic and self-control from a woman that their own cultures would have otherwise silenced. She taught openly, not in secrecy. She traveled through the city cloaked in the garment of a philosopher, drawing attention in public squares and amphitheaters, frequently delivering speeches before diverse audiences. It was not merely her expertise that fascinated people, but her very personality. Hypatia was known for her refined taste and disinterest in riches or indulgence. She chose to remain single, possibly by design, to preserve her freedom and philosophical integrity. One tale, probably fictional but revealing, tells of a student who romantically pursued her. She rejected him by throwing a blood-soaked menstrual cloth and saying, "This is what you desire, young man, not beauty." The message was clear. Nonetheless, despite her resilience, she was not unfeeling. Many of her pupils admired her deeply, not only as an educator, but also as a moral compass. Some students eventually became bishops, judges, and governors. Notably, Caius of Cyrene, one of her most loyal followers, became a Christian bishop, yet retained his deep respect for Hypatia lifelong, writing to her as if combining admiration, philosophical discussion, and spiritual counsel. She represented much more than scholarship. She was the living spirit of Alexandria's ancient heritage, scientific, philosophical, tolerant, and fiercely intelligent amid a world growing increasingly intolerant. By the moment Hypatia reached the peak of her intellectual powers, the Library of Alexandria, once the greatest treasure of human knowledge, had become little more than a shadow of its past. The original edifice had been devastated by relentless waves of conflict, abandonment, and political turmoil. What survived was dispersed throughout the city. Annexes, manuscripts hidden away in private collections, and a handful of scholars still holding onto the vision of universal understanding. Among these, none shone more brilliantly than Hypatia. Although she did not officially serve as the librarian for what remained, many regarded her as the true successor of that legacy. She meticulously edited and safeguarded crucial mathematical writings, particularly those authored by Diphantus and Apollonius. Some experts argue that she even played a role in developing the astrolabe and the hydrometer, devices essential for astronomy and precise measurement. Indeed, she was not merely speculating about the heavens. She actively assisted in creating the very instruments used to study celestial bodies. Furthermore, her annotations on Ptolemy's Almagest, a complex astronomical treatise filled with intricate mathematical models detailing planetary movements, were exceptional. Most people could barely pronounce the title, much less enhance the text. Yet Hypatia's revisions rendered the work easier to understand for future scholars, securing its preservation across generations. Ironically, her edits became standard in Arabic versions centuries later, long after the Roman world had forgotten her legacy. Yet Hypatia did not keep knowledge to herself. She firmly believed in the continuous sharing of wisdom. Her classroom was wherever she happened to be. Whether illustrating parabolas or dissecting Plato's theories, she never separated science from philosophy. To her, they were distinct realms. Yet, in her view, the mind and the universe were connected, forming a single, vast, and unified network. This conviction earned her admiration, but also exposed her to danger. As Alexandria transformed, Christian leaders were gaining influence. Sacred sites were being transformed into churches, and mistrust toward pagan wisdom was spreading. Hypatia, a thinker grounded in classical teachings, began to be perceived not merely as an educator, but as a menace, a woman devoted to teaching astronomy rather than religious doctrine, who challenged instead of complied, and who openly identified with no faith. It was irrelevant that some of her pupils were Christians, or that she never openly criticized the church. What truly counted was what she symbolized. Hypatia embodied the ancient world marked by reason and exploration. In a city shifting toward strict religious beliefs, that was far more threatening than any ancient manuscript. By the early 5th century, Alexandria no longer resembled the peaceful center of knowledge it once aimed to be. Instead, it became a hotbed of religious fanaticism, political power struggles, and frequent street violence. Whether she accepted it or not, Hypatia had transformed into more than just a scholar. She had become a figurehead, and such figures often draw angry crowds. The atmosphere in the city was thick with tension. On one side stood the pagan intellectual aristocracy, still holding on to the last vestiges of Greco-Roman heritage. On the other side rose the surging force of Christianity, no longer persecuted, but a confident and dominant political entity. In the midst of the chaos were Roman officials struggling to maintain order with the futility of a man attempting to clean the entire ocean. The recently appointed Christian bishop of Alexandria, Cyril, was ambitious, powerful, and determined to establish the church's dominance over the city. His adversary was Orestes, the Roman governor who was also a Christian, but took a more cautious political approach while showing tolerance for Alexandria's long-standing diversity in beliefs. The hostility between these two men was intense, and into this volatile mix, Hypatia unwittingly became a focal point of tension. She earned Orestes' respect, often acting as a trusted counselor. However, she remained firmly neutral in matters of faith, refusing to convert or take any side, and insisted on remaining visible. At a time when neutrality was considered betrayal, this stance became problematic. The Christian community, especially its more radical members, began spreading rumors that Hypatia was the cause of the conflict between Orestes and Cyril. They claimed she practiced magic, influenced politics through pagan sorcery, and was preventing Alexandria from fulfilling its Christian future. Naturally, these allegations were baseless, yet in a city overwhelmed by fervor and violence, falsehoods traveled quicker than truth. Meanwhile, a group called the Parabolani, initially formed to care for the sick and handle funerals, were evolving into a sort of religious enforcement squad with physical power under Cyril's command, taking on more of a paramilitary role. The church asserted its authority openly on the streets. Amid this, there was Hypatia, a brilliant and independent woman held in high regard even by the Roman authorities. She openly embraced her pagan beliefs and rode through the city calmly in her chariot as if she bore no threat or danger. However, in Alexandria's shifting power structure, no one remained safe for long. Cyril of Alexandria ascended to leadership with strong ambitions. Taking over from his uncle Theophilus as bishop in the year 412 CE, Cyril inherited a church determined to dominate and had no intention of serving only as a spiritual guide. He was a man who wielded theology as a sharp weapon and politics as a concealed blade. The city, torn apart by conflicting beliefs, was the perfect battleground for his political and religious campaign. Cyril's goal had two key aims: to eliminate heresy and to establish the church's dominance over the state's authority. Without hesitation, he shut down Novatian churches, forced the expulsion of Jews from Alexandria, and strengthened his control over both religious discourse and street presence. His sermons did more than motivate; they energized crowds into action. Aware of the impact of spectacle, he combined sacred language with brute force, using the Parabolani, an unofficial militant group associated with the church, as his enforcers. This approach naturally created conflict with Orestes, the city's imperial governor. Although Orestes was a Christian himself, he adhered to Rome's long history of religious tolerance and opposed Cyril's harsh tactics, especially those that violated civil laws. Their confrontation marked a significant clash between church ambition and imperial governance in Alexandria's contested landscape. The relationship deteriorated more swiftly than a marble tumbling down the steps of a temple staircase. Alex attempted diplomacy. He attempted restraint. Instead of cooperation, he faced aggression. When a Christian mob tried to assassinate him by throwing stones while he was delivering a public speech, and one monk named Ammonius was captured and executed for the assault, Philip declared him a martyr. What was once a division had now turned into a gaping wound. Caught in the midst of this intense battle for power was Hypatia. Respected by Alex, disliked by Philip's followers, and impossible to overlook, she held a unique position. Although she did not openly engage in politics, her sharp mind and influence made her a perceived threat. Her very presence challenged the notion that all knowledge came exclusively from the church. A woman, a pagan, an astronomer, and a close confidant to Philip's fiercest political opponent, she lacked any army or desire for political office. But in a city where theology merged completely with authority, attempting to stay neutral was the riskiest stance one could take. Philip's silence amid the mounting accusations against her would soon become painfully loud. For in Alexandria, once the crowd begins accusing someone of witchcraft, it is only a matter of time before flames are set. By the year 414 after the Common Era, Alexandria had evolved into a place where truth was unnecessary for condemnation, only doubt, and a large gathering. Hypatia, who had once been praised throughout the empire as a philosopher of extraordinary genius, was now being painted in shadowy hues by her adversaries. Rumors spread. Whispers spread rapidly like a contagion, claiming she was a sorceress who had Orestes enthralled, plotting schemes against the church. None of these allegations held any truth, yet facts no longer held sway. Much of the hostility toward Hypatia stemmed from her prominence. She was a public figure known for riding her chariot openly, teaching in public spaces, and advising influential officials. Such boldness in a woman shocked the strict ideology emerging among Alexandria's religious conservatives. To them, Hypatia embodied all that was wrong with the old order. She was female, a philosopher, and proudly unconverted. Rumors circulated that she worshipped demons, practiced dark magic, and used her astrolabes as tools to manipulate men's minds. In truth, these devices were merely instruments of science. However, in a time dominated by religious fanaticism, science could easily appear as witchcraft to those who either could not comprehend it or refused to accept it. One tale even accused her of blocking a reconciliation between Orestes and Bishop Cyril. The reasoning was simple. Hypatia counseled Orestes, Orestes opposed Cyril, therefore Hypatia must be behind the conflict. This neat syllogism was convenient and straightforward, but terribly mistaken. The city was alive with tension and unrest. The question was no longer whether something would happen to Hypatia, but when and how violently it would occur. The Parabolani, once humble caretakers of the needy, had completely transformed into fanatics driven by zealotry. There was a growing unrest driving the situation. The city's Christian majority, already ready to view Hypatia as a threatening pagan sorceress, only needed a subtle sign to act. This sign never openly came from Cyril. He was too cautious to provide it. Yet his failure to denounce the rumors, to calm the hysteria, and to publicly defend a woman he must have known was innocent, spoke volumes. Silence, in this context, became a powerful message. Thus, the trap gradually, almost unnoticed, closed around Hypatia, not with physical chains, but through whispers and accusing fingers. It was the kind of confinement invisible until it is irrevocably late. This event took place in the spring of 415 CE. Hypatia, now in her mid-50s, still moved through Alexandria's streets in her chariot, continued to educate her pupils, and persisted in defying the false image constructed by her adversaries. She probably sensed the danger coming. The looks directed at her had grown increasingly hostile, the whispers grew sharper, and the atmosphere thickened with menace. Nevertheless, she continued steadfastly, embodying a living challenge to fanaticism. Then one day, they came for her. There was no formal trial or official execution. Instead, a furious mob full of self-righteous anger surged forward. Led by the Parabolani and reportedly incited by a man named Philip, a church reader, they stopped her on the street. She was pulled from her chariot, stripped of her garments, and taken into a church, a place meant for worship, turned into a scene of brutal violence. What unfolded afterward is nearly unbearable to recount without recoiling. Contemporary reports underscore the horror. Various accounts, especially from the historian Socrates Scholasticus, describe how the crowd killed her using roof tiles or oyster shells, tearing the flesh from her bones. Some versions claim they dismembered her body piece by piece. What remains certain is that after she was murdered, her remains were set ablaze. This additional cruelty seemed intended to erase all evidence of her existence, as if that could somehow justify the act. This was not a killing based on law or justice, but driven by fervent emotion and ideology rather than legal grounds. There was no trial, no judgment, simply an execution fueled by rage. Alexandria lost more than just a woman that day. It lost its final voice of the classical tradition, its last public philosopher, and arguably its last symbol of the cosmopolitan spirit that had once defined the city. Orestes was unable to intervene. Cyril expressed sorrow but distanced himself from any blame. No arrests were made and no official investigation took place. The silence that had preceded Hypatia's death was succeeded by even deeper quiet and eventual oblivion. However, the harm was irreversible. With her passing, a symbolic gateway to antiquity's age of reason was firmly shut. This event marked the decline of Alexandria as a center of intellectual thought and the beginning of its shift toward rigid theological dominance. Her mutilated corpse was the final mark on a long process of cultural decay. A respected scholar was slain. A world was lost. In the weeks that followed this savage killing, Alexandria fell into a haunting silence, not because peace had been restored, but because the city was enveloped in fear and uncertainty. Something vital had vanished. The city's avenues remained lively. Temples still echoed with bells. Officials continued to approve documents. Yet the spirit of the city, that vibrant exchange of ideas, that blend of Greek philosophy, Roman order, and Egyptian spirituality, had faded forever. No justice awaited Hypatia, no official hearing, no compensation. The arresting officer, already diminished, eventually vanished from history. Some claim he abandoned Alexandria, politically too marginalized to lead. Others believe he was summoned back to Rome. Either way, the sole authority figure who had tried to protect her was no longer present. Bishop Cyril, however, rose from the turmoil more influential than ever. Although Cyril denied any role in her death, many interpreted his silence and speeches as implicit endorsement. He made no move to punish the perpetrators. He never publicly condemned the killing. Eventually, he was even declared a saint. Cyril of Alexandria became better known for his fights against heresy than for the philosopher whose life ended under his watch. Hypatia's memory, meanwhile, was quickly erased not only physically, but also intellectually. Her name was removed from records. Her works were lost, her lessons credited to others, and her achievements in mathematics and astronomy scattered through history with barely any clear attribution. In a historical moment, one of the brightest intellects of late antiquity was reduced to a faint murmur, yet faint murmurs endure. Centuries later, Hypatia's tale continues to resonate. Her story began to re-emerge first within the texts of Renaissance humanists who regarded her as a martyr for rational thought. Later, in the salons of the Enlightenment era, she came to represent intellectual liberty oppressed by rigid beliefs. By the 19th and 20th centuries, her image rose again as the female philosopher, the last protector of Alexandria's ancient knowledge, a sorrowful figure whose demise signified the decline of classical culture. However, much of what we understand about Hypatia today is derived mainly from the testimonies of men. Pupils like Caius, historians such as Socrates, Scholasticus, and chroniclers of later times attempted to reconstruct fragments of her story like piecing together a broken mosaic. The woman herself, her voice was silenced, yet that quietude turned into a powerful roar. Despite many centuries of silence, Hypatia insisted on not being lost to history. Her name, once nearly wiped away, resurfaced every time societies questioned authority and cherished the quest for knowledge. She became more than a mere historic character. She transformed into a symbol not simply of a scholar who was violently silenced, but of an enduring idea. That reason must maintain its ground even when the world around it becomes hostile. During the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered her narrative and portrayed her as a martyr to ignorance. In the Enlightenment, thinkers and skeptics highlighted Hypatia as evidence of the consequences when religion suppresses investigation. Voltaire wrote about her with intense anger, describing her death as the conclusive blow that ended classical education. Over time, she was depicted as a tragic heroine in dramas, poetry, and novels. Hidden beneath a tranquil section of the Italian Alps, only 30 meters from Turin, lies a secret that challenges belief. It does not appear on common maps, nor is it promoted to visitors. There are no Roman relics or medieval cathedrals in sight. Instead, under the mountain village of Vidraco, rests an enormous hand-carved subterranean network, a maze of sacred rooms called the Temples of Humankind. For nearly 20 years, only a small spiritual community was aware of its existence. This is far from a simple cave with a few paintings. The temples extend through 5 levels, linked by corridors, spiral staircases, and monumental domes that could rival the design of grand cathedrals. The walls are adorned with sacred artwork, mosaics, stained glass, cosmic symbols, and golden altars, all crafted, painted, and set by human hands. It feels as though someone attempted to build an underground version of the Sistine Chapel, then infused it with Egyptian hieroglyphs, Buddhist mandalas, Mayan icons, and star charts for added depth and meaning. Who was behind its creation? Neither the Vatican nor a secret society with long-standing traditions. Instead, it was a relatively obscure spiritual group named Damanhur, after the ancient Egyptian city believed to be the heart of Horus worship. Established in 1975, this collective dreamed of a society founded on harmony, independence, and spiritual advancement. The temples stand as their tangible expression of that vision, a remarkable testament to their ideals. This sacred sanctuary was designed to realign human awareness with the cosmos. The construction started in 1978, led by Oberto Ayaldi, who was once an insurance broker before transforming into a mystical visionary. Without official approval, plans, or modern tools, Alex and his followers dug deep into the rock beneath a secluded private residence. They labored through the nights, using excavated earth to shape the surrounding hills, all while keeping their project a secret. This was a form of spiritual defiance, secretly creating something they believed could never exist openly. Remarkably, they managed to keep it hidden for 17 years. No one imagined that behind the simple country home facade, a group of artists, engineers, and devotees was crafting an extraordinary underground marvel. It was only when a resentful former member informed the authorities in the 1990s that Italian police, expecting to uncover a bunker or tax haven, instead encountered one of the most impressive subterranean sites in contemporary Europe. The temples of humankind did not arise spontaneously. They were the outcome of a grand and deeply unorthodox vision conceived by a man named Oberto Iraudi, later called Falco by his followers. During the 1970s, Iraudi was not yet a spiritual leader, but held a conventional job as an insurance agent in northern Italy. However, beneath his exterior, he was consumed by interests in metaphysics, reincarnation, ancient cultures, and the concept he named the memory of the cosmos. Iraudi insisted that from his earliest years, he had been fascinated by these ideas. Alex experienced vivid memories from past lives. These were not just hazy impressions, but detailed visions of existences in long-lost civilizations, including Atlantis and ancient Egypt. He was convinced these memories were not figments of imagination, but actual blueprints. One of these plans, he explained, was for a temple, an actual sanctuary intended for spiritual awakening, to be concealed underground and built by a community united in their purpose. In 1975, Alex gathered a small group of like-minded people in the foothills of the Alps. They all shared his vision of a self-sustaining, spiritually advanced society. The group chose the name Damanhur, inspired by the Egyptian city known as a center for Horus worship and esoteric wisdom. Their goal was not to create a new religion, but to form a new kind of society that balanced science, art, ecology, and spirituality. Damanhur grew quietly over time as members left their former lives behind to live together in communes within the Italian countryside. They engaged in meditation, sacred dance, and even invented a language they believed heightened subtle communication. They established their own currency, studied ancient writings, and claimed to communicate with trees. To those outside, this way of life seemed either endearing or odd, but to the members, they were setting the foundation for a cosmic renaissance. The true secret, however, lay beneath it all. Construction had already started. Alex said he had seen the temple in his visions. Visions inspired him, and he was convinced it was his fate to bring them to life. Armed with pickaxes, hammers, buckets, and steadfast determination, the people of Damhur launched their excavation, uncertain if they would ever complete it or be discovered. They were not merely breaking through stone, but digging into faith itself, creating a sanctuary designed not for their time, but for a future they deeply trusted would arrive. From the outside, the house sitting atop the hill in Vidraco appeared utterly unremarkable. It was simply a humble mountain dwelling, resting peacefully above the valley below. Yet beneath its floors, hidden behind a secret trapdoor concealed by a carpet, was the entrance to a growing tunnel system. Under the cover of darkness and silence, the inhabitants of Damhur embarked on what could only be called an architectural marvel, handcrafting an extensive underground temple. Construction started in 1978. There were no cranes, no excavators, no teams donning helmets and uniforms, only a small group equipped with pickaxes, hammers, and lanterns. They broke through solid rock using simple tools, hauling debris out bucket by bucket, often working through the night to avoid being detected. The removed earth was quietly spread over the surrounding landscape, fashioned into gardens and terraces, leaving no hint that a vast project was unfolding below ground. The endeavor was perilous beyond measure. The project had no official approval, and there were no safety regulations to follow. A single error could have led to a collapse, trapping them beneath tons of stone forever. Yet the Damanhurans were convinced they enjoyed protection through faith, fate, and the wisdom of a superior beings. This was not merely construction, but a holy ceremony. Each hammer blow was a gesture of devotion. Ayaldi, or Falco, as some called him, insisted he had glimpsed the temple in a vision, seeing every chamber, corridor, and shining altar. His drawing served as the blueprint. Domes symbolizing various spiritual concepts were linked by corridors filled with artwork and light. Each room was designed for a specific purpose, such as contemplation, healing, or balancing energy. The design followed sacred geometry and mystical signs instead of contemporary practicality. Even as the group grew, the secret remained intact. Generations shared tales of their children playing above the hidden temple floor, completely unaware of the mysteries below. Miraculously, for almost 15 years, not a single neighbor noticed anything unusual. No curious person entered forbidden areas, and no official authority stepped in. By the early 1990s, they had excavated an underground complex spacious enough to contain multiple levels of intricately adorned chambers without detection. This achievement was a testament to human determination, possible obsession, creativity, or maybe all combined. Their project went beyond a simple temple. It was an act of rebellion against modern times, demonstrating that something ancient could still be born concealed underneath. For close to 17 years, the temples of humankind stood as one of the most closely guarded secrets in contemporary Europe. Yet, as with all secrets, this one eventually came to light. Not quietly, but with a powerful impact. In the year 1992, a former member of Daemon, upset due to a conflict with the leadership, chose to reveal the presence of a hidden underground complex to the Italian authorities. He asserted that a massive unauthorized structure was buried beneath the Alps. This was neither registered nor inspected by any officials, and certainly without approval. To the government, the claim seemed ridiculous. The idea that an entire temple network was constructed by a cult without raising any suspicion was difficult to accept. Nevertheless, the authorities were obliged to investigate. When law enforcement arrived at the location in Vidraco, they anticipated discovering at most an illicit basement or perhaps a small bunker. Instead, what they encountered surpassed all their expectations. Entering through a concealed hatch, they descended into expansive chambers shining with intricate mosaics, golden altars, and stained glass windows, all beneath the earth. Marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and sacred symbols representing every recognized spiritual tradition covered the space. The officers were astounded. Some accounts report that they felt as if they had uncovered a lost civilization. The sheer scale and craftsmanship of the temples defied reasoning. This was not merely a hidden room, but a multi-level architectural masterpiece carved from solid rock, well concealed despite its grandeur. News about the find spread rapidly, prompting a mixture of public fascination, outrage, and governmental chaos. Initially shocked, the Italian administration ordered an immediate halt to any work at the site. Authorities issued an order and threatened to close the entire complex forever. After all, no official permits had been submitted, and there were serious doubts about the structural integrity. However, something surprising occurred. Instead of shrinking away in fear or dismissing it mockingly, the public became fascinated. Photographs of the chambers, especially the Hall of Mirrors and the Blue Temple, started appearing in Italian newspapers. People were spellbound. Who were these creators? How had they managed to construct such a place? And for what purpose? Faced with either destruction or exposure, Damon decided to reveal everything. They welcomed officials, reporters, and even doubtful scientists to explore the temples. What they discovered could not be denied. This was not the handiwork of a cult, but a grand artistic and spiritual achievement. In their attempt to erase the vision, Damon Herr had actually made a wonder. Now the entire world was eager to experience it. Once the secret was revealed, there was no turning back. With the danger of demolition hanging over them, the demonic community took a daring step: complete openness. Instead of concealing or denying their creation, they opened their doors to everyone. It was a strategic gamble, but it succeeded beyond expectations. Reporters, archaeologists, engineers, and even doubtful government representatives were guided into the mountain to witness what had been carved beneath the surface. What they encountered was hardly a hidden cult refuge. It resembled more an underground Vatican fused with the subconscious world of Gordy. Among the wonders was the Hall of Mirrors, a vast room surrounded by reflective surfaces, creating an unforgettable experience. Walls adorned with stained glass ceilings and floors covered in tiles mirrored light in a dazzling array of vibrant patterns. Among these spaces stood the Hall of Earth, shaped like a chalice, dedicated to the feminine essence and ancient earth goddesses. Every temple was crafted with meticulous care, not only in artistic terms, but also in energetic harmony with what the Daemonhurans considered synchronic lines, invisible cosmic currents crisscrossing the planet. The architecture was intentionally built to synchronize with these currents, enhancing their power and transforming the area into a unique spiritual generator. As public intrigue and media attention grew, Italian officials found themselves in a challenging situation. The temples were officially illegal, yet demolishing them meant wiping out a contemporary artistic wonder that had captured widespread admiration. In an uncommon act of bureaucratic leniency, the authorities opted for regulation rather than destruction. Instead of closing the site, Daemonhur kept ownership but had to comply with tight safety and preservation rules. Structural engineers assessed the durability, historians documented symbolic meanings, and artists could only marvel at the creation. By the mid-1990s, the temples of humankind shifted from secret wonders to cultural landmarks. The community organized guided visits and spiritual gatherings. Documentarians and photographers captured the scenes. Critics existed naturally, but fascination far surpassed disapproval. What was once concealed was now accessible to all. To the world, a curious twist occurred as the very secrecy that once shielded the temples transformed into their most powerful promotional asset. Visitors were not merely drawn by the artwork, they sought to experience a wonder that was believed impossible. The mountain had kept its mystery hidden, but now it shared it openly with everyone. At first glance, the temples of humankind might appear as a chaotic blend of colors, symbols, and celestial motifs, resembling an out-of-control art experiment. However, to the Daemonurans, every detail holds significance. This was far more than a sacred site. It functioned as a device for consciousness, a metaphysical instrument crafted to enhance spiritual energy, awaken dormant human abilities, and reconnect humanity with the universe. Central to Daemon's teachings is the idea that the Earth is woven with synchronic lines, energy currents akin to ley lines or acupuncture points. These pathways link significant locations worldwide, including the pyramids, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, and now the underground temples of Vidraco. The placement of the temples was deliberate, built where these energy lines crossed, turning them, according to Daemonurian reasoning, into interdimensional energy hubs. Each temple chamber embodies a unique spiritual idea. For example, the Hall of Water focuses on past lives and emotional restoration, while the Hall of Spheres serves as the temple's energetic center, designed to facilitate connection with higher realms, intelligences and civilizations far away. No, this is not just a metaphor. The Daemonurans sincerely believe that consciousness extends beyond our planet and that the temples serve as a signal. It is more than a symbol. Their community weaves sound, geometry, and material resonance directly into the design to trigger these forces. Walls contain copper coils, and quartz crystals are strategically placed to bounce back specific frequencies. Every single aspect, from colors to symbols to supplies, is selected for its harmony with human awareness and the vibrations of the Earth. Visitors frequently report unusual sensations, sensing pulses of energy, hearing mysterious sounds, or slipping into altered levels of perception. Whether it is a psychological effect or an actual energetic network, the temples certainly seem to produce an impact. Even doubtful researchers have observed abnormally intense electromagnetic fields within some rooms. For the Daemonurans who believe science only serves to validate what they already understand. This is a temple full of life, a structure that responds to intent, emotion, and thought. It forms a connection not simply between our planet and the cosmos, but between our present selves and our potential. In their view, humankind's temples are not mere ancient monuments, but models shaping what is ahead. Though the subterranean temples are the most breathtaking parts of Daemonur, they represent just one section of a broader spiritual venture. Above the surface, the Federation of Daemon operates as a deliberate micronation, fully integrated. The community has its own constitution, currency, educational institutions, and even a unique system for keeping time. Indeed, they follow a distinct calendar that began in the year 1975, which marks the founding of the Federation. According to Daemonurian reckoning, the current year falls in the 50s. This society is structured into eco-villages, each dedicated to a different role such as agriculture, the arts, scientific research, healing practices, or temple-related activities. Everyday life blends spiritual elements with ordinary routines. Inhabitants cultivate their own food, engage in collective meditations, and gather weekly for social alchemy sessions that aim to harmonize personal spiritual development with the group's shared growth. During its height, Daemonur hosted more than 1,000 members representing over 30 nations. People do not join casually, but go through an initiation period and are encouraged to adopt communal living, part with some of their belongings, and contribute their talents to support the community. Members' occupations vary widely, including sculptors and software developers. Everyone is expected to play a part in advancing the collective well-being. Education holds a central place in Daemonurian culture, as children learn not only standard subjects like mathematics and language, but also study sacred geometry, ancient myths, and how to perceive energy. The community even offers a Daemonurian university where students can explore esoteric sciences, spiritual physics, and alternative healing techniques. If this sounds somewhat like a magical school powered by sustainable energy, you are not far from the truth. At the core of their philosophy is the belief that divinity dwells within every individual. The community believes that humanity's mission is to awaken to its role as a partner with the universe. This involves living in sync with nature, delving into consciousness and using creativity as a sacred instrument. To outsiders, the group may appear unusual, perhaps even cultish, but there is no single god, no enforced doctrine, nor a dominant leader. Governance is democratic, with rotating responsibilities. Members have the freedom to leave, and many choose to do so. Critics exist as well. Some former participants mention internal tensions, rigid ideology, or exhaustion. Yet, even detractors acknowledge it is unlike anything else on the planet. Damhur is more than just a commune or spiritual sanctuary. It is a continual social experiment where individuals genuinely attempt to embody a myth instead of merely studying it. Walking through the temples built by this community is like entering a realm constructed from symbols. Every surface, walls, ceilings, floors, carries layers of significance that are mythological, mathematical, and cosmic. However, Damhur does not view art simply as decoration. Art here is sacred technology, designed to awaken the inner spirit, unlock ancient memories, and communicate with higher powers without uttering a single word. Their visual language is deliberate, blending Egyptian symbols, Celtic spirals, Hindu gods, and star maps imagining the future. One room might showcase the Eye of Horus, while another displays stylized representations of DNA strands or cosmic alignments. These are not merely decorative designs, they are intentional codes. Those in Damhur believe these symbols convey profound messages. The language of the soul speaks directly beyond the logical mind, awakening a profound level of understanding. But why mix so many cultures and traditions together? According to their beliefs, every myth is merely a piece of a vast, universal truth. Tales shared across various languages all point toward the same cosmic origin. These temples do not claim to recreate any single faith. Rather, they aim to unify them all, not as a dull combination, but as an intentional blending of humanity's spiritual heritage. Another fascinating aspect is the topic of language, or more precisely, languages. Damhur has crafted its own sacred tongue, called sacred language. Although the name is straightforward, it accurately represents a system of thousands of ideograms, each intended to convey spiritual ideas that everyday speech cannot express fully. You will notice these symbols etched into stone and glass throughout the temples, shimmering with gold leaf, carved into vibrant marble, and seemingly hovering over doorways like luminous incantations. For the community, these glyphs are not inventions, they are rediscoveries. Falco insisted this language originates from ancient civilizations that existed before recorded history, possibly even from alien sources. In essence, the symbols are more unearthed than invented, acting like spiritual relics from a wiser, earlier era. Visitors frequently describe their time inside the temples as deeply emotional, sometimes overwhelming. Many shed tears. Some say they experience a peculiar feeling of recognition, as if recalling a memory long forgotten. That is precisely the intention. The temples are not made to provide explanations. Their purpose is to inspire feelings. In Damhur, truth is not something one learns. Instead, it is awakened through narrative, symbolism, and the quiet moments between speech. The temples created by humanity were never intended to serve as memorials of history. They represent a plan for what lies ahead. Not only a spiritual vision, but also a cultural evolution where architecture, awareness, and community blend together to form something original. While the surface world hurries on with technology and separation, the world beneath Vidraco grows deliberately, slowly, like painting a masterpiece stroke by stroke. Even now, the temples remain incomplete. Damhur views them as living entities, continuously changing. New halls are constructed, old sections are restored, paintings receive fresh touches, and new symbols are introduced to mirror the community's shifting energy. Unlike conventional holy places preserved in one moment of time, the temples of humankind breathe and develop alongside their creators. Since their unveiling, Damhur has broadened its influence worldwide. The Federation now encompasses centers across various nations, offers online classes, and attracts a steady flow of international visitors seeking spiritual retreats, energy healing, or simple curiosity. Some come expecting superficial spiritual trends, but many depart profoundly moved, not necessarily converted, yet struck by the immense vision behind the site. How many communities truly create such living, evolving masterpieces, building cathedrals from the ground up, hidden beneath the surface in secret places? Even so, Damanhur does have its share of critics. Doubters raise questions about some of its assertions, such as past life memories, synchronicity in lines, and communication beyond the stars. Others express concern about the group's intense atmosphere or the level of commitment it demands from its followers. Yet despite all this, the Federation has persevered not through isolation, but by welcoming others inside. Nowadays, these temples represent what is possible when creativity, purpose, and community unite. They remind us that the ancient sacred monuments like pyramids, cathedrals, and ziggurats were not mere structures. They stood as manifestations of shared conviction. Damon challenges us to wonder why humanity stopped crafting in such profound ways. Perhaps the true legacy of these temples lies not in their doctrines, but in their daring spirit. In a society obsessed with speed and spectacle, a collective of ordinary individuals chose to excavate the earth and create something holy by hand, quietly, valuing beauty and the spirit. This is more than a temple. It is a challenge etched into stone. What are you building with your life? Long before satellites circled the planet or explorers shouted, "Land ahead," humans were already on the move. They traced shorelines, crossed vast deserts, and recorded their visions of the world onto clay, stone, or animal skin. Traveling was not driven by mere curiosity, but by the necessity to survive. The first pioneers were not adventurers, but gatherers and seekers. Travelers, hunters, and those fleeing danger, movement evolved beyond mere survival. It transformed into a deliberate plan and eventually turned into a lasting tradition. The first maps were far from elaborate cartographic works. Instead, they were simple markings on cave walls, engravings on bones, or images shared through spoken stories. Around 2,300 years before the Common Era, the Babylonians carved one of the earliest known maps onto a clay tablet. It did not depict the entire world but showed a specific region with rivers, towns, and mountains. To them, the earth was a flat disk surrounded by a cosmic ocean, with Babylon positioned at its center. Though not geographically precise, the map conveyed something more crucial: intention. The Babylonians sought to comprehend their environment and find their way within it. How did people travel without roads, signs, or celestial charts? They observed the sun, studied the stars, memorized the landscape, tracked animal migrations, and noted the direction of the wind. When fortune favored them, they passed this wisdom to someone with a sharper memory. For example, ancient Polynesians became experts at navigating by reading ocean waves, bird flight patterns, and constellation placements. Traders in Mesopotamia relied on river systems such as the Tigris and Euphrates, turning seasonal floodwaters into natural trade routes. During those early times, traveling was seldom a solitary venture. It was a group activity that proceeded slowly and was often perilous. Travelers faced threats from bandits, harsh weather, illness, and even the risk of vanishing completely without a trace. However, they also transported goods, languages, ideas, and technologies across different regions. Trade routes started to develop like veins throughout the ancient world's landscape. Exploration did not have to reach new continents to be groundbreaking. Sometimes simply arriving at the next city-state, the following oasis, or the nearby fertile valley was enough. These small journeys built the intricate network of connections that eventually became what we call civilization itself. When discussing ancient exploration, we are not only referring to distant travels. It is about a deep-rooted desire to discover what lies beyond the horizon and to leave a mark in uncharted territories. The ancient Egyptians were not famous for extensive wandering, but when they traveled, it was always with ceremony, ritual, and commonly a protective armed group. The Nile River served as their main route, and it certainly was not just for leisurely trips. Pharaohs sent missions down south to Nubia, eastward into the Sinai Peninsula, and even farther to mysterious places like Punt, a semi-legendary land Egyptians identified as God's land. Its exact whereabouts remain uncertain. Some suggest Somalia, Eritrea, or southern Arabia. Although the precise location is debated, what is clear is that Egyptians dispatched ships there filled with goods and prayers, aiming to bring back incense, gold, rare animals, and a sense of sacred prestige. One of the most renowned expeditions took place during the rule of Queen Hatshepsut, Egypt's powerful female pharaoh. Around 1478, before the Common Era, she organized a journey to Punt, demonstrating the importance and grandeur of these exploratory missions for ancient Egyptian society. The voyage was proudly documented on the walls of her mortuary temple at Dea el-Bahi. The engravings show enormous ships, men carrying myrrh trees, and locals with distinctive features and intricate headpieces. This was more than mere commerce. It combined diplomacy, propaganda, and spiritual connection into a single event. Egyptians also journeyed into the Sinai Peninsula, not only for military purposes, but to extract turquoise and copper. These missions often included hundreds of laborers, scribes, soldiers, and priests. Travel was sponsored by the state and meticulously chronicled. Pharaohs did not send casual explorers. They deployed well-organized logistical operations. Officials recorded every detail: what was mined, who took part, and how many offerings were made to the gods to ensure a safe trip. Although deserts surrounded Egypt, the land was not isolated. Caravans traversed the western deserts, linking oases and bringing goods from regions as distant as Libya. Although sea journeys were perilous, they enabled contact with Byblos, Crete, and other ports across the eastern Mediterranean. However, ancient Egyptian travel was no simple matter. Whether by land or sea, expeditions progressed slowly, faced many dangers, and required significant resources. Still, such ventures were considered vital extensions of divine order. Whenever the pharaoh moved, the entire nation followed. Each expedition strengthened the belief that Egypt sat at the cosmos's center, with all others, whether allies, enemies, or foreigners, existing to be understood, controlled, or revered. For the Phoenicians, exploration was not an act of defiance against the divine, but rather a devotion to their gods. While ancient Egypt focused inward, contemplating its river and deities, the Phoenicians gazed outward across the open sea, crafting vessels to pursue the distant horizon. Emerging around 1500 years before the Common Era from coastal cities such as Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon, located in modern Lebanon, they did not aim to conquer land. Instead, they dominated the waters. Through this mastery, they became the most courageous sailors and merchants of the ancient world. Unlike traditional empires, they had no massive armies or towering sacred structures. Instead, they created something arguably more remarkable: an extensive network. The Phoenicians built trade routes extending throughout the Mediterranean Sea, touching the Levant, North Africa, Cyprus, Sicily, Spain, and reaching the enigmatic western boundary near the Strait of Gibraltar. Along their journeys, they established cities, the most notable being Carthage, which would later challenge the power of Rome itself. What was the secret of their success? Their ships were the key. Designed to be sleek, swift, and resilient, Phoenician vessels were marvels of their era. Combining both oars and sails with tall hulls for defense and curved shapes to cut through waves, these ships were more than means of transportation. They were floating marketplaces, stocked with cedar wood, glassware, richly dyed textiles famous for their purple hue, and an alphabetic script engraved in stone that was traded like advanced technology. Indeed, the Phoenicians also gifted the world one of the earliest writing systems. One of the most powerful inventions for human connection was the alphabet. The Phoenician script made writing much simpler by transitioning from cuneiform and hieroglyphs to a set of only 22 characters. This system later shaped the Greek, Latin, and eventually the alphabets we use today. Nonetheless, Phoenician voyages were fraught with dangers. Pirates lurked in the seas, storms could shatter vessels into pieces, and every new port posed threats from hostile inhabitants or economic rivals. Yet they continued their journeys, not as conquerors, but as bridges between cultures. They transported tin from Britain, silver from the Iberian Peninsula, papyrus from Egypt, and spices from Arabia. Some historians, including Herodotus, even suggest that Phoenician sailors, backed by Egypt, sailed around Africa as early as the 6th century before the Common Era. This is a daring statement, but if anyone at that time could have completed such a voyage, it was probably the Phoenicians. They did not construct grand monuments. Instead, they established connections that charted the pulse of the ancient world through the elements of wind, sea, and commerce. While Mediterranean mariners sailed across the waves, trading between cities far to the east, a different kind of expedition was taking place. This journey was slower, dustier, and equally world-changing. In ancient China, travel did not involve ocean vessels. It meant caravans crossing deserts, winding through mountains, and facing some of Earth's harshest landscapes. This marked the start of what we now know as the Silk Road, a vast web of trade routes that linked distant lands and cultures through hardship and persistence. Overland paths connected East Asia with the Middle East, Central Asia, and ultimately Europe. Their beginnings date back to the Han Dynasty near the 2nd century, before the Common Era, when Emperor Wu of Han dispatched an envoy named Zhang Qian westward to forge alliances against nomadic raiders. Although Zhang Qian did not succeed in his diplomatic goal, he unexpectedly uncovered vast civilizations beyond China's western borders. Years later, he returned recounting tales of Persian merchandise, Central Asian horses, and fascinating cultures. The emperor was displeased with the prolonged journey, but intrigued by the opportunities it presented. Commercial pathways flourished as Chinese traders began selling silk, lacquerware, spices, jade, and porcelain. Commodities so coveted they became symbols of prestige, stretching from India all the way to Rome. In exchange, caravans brought back horses, glassware, wool, and gold. However, it was not only goods that crossed these routes. Ideas, technologies, and faiths traveled as well. Buddhism spread from India into China. Artistic expressions blended, musical instruments were shared, and even paper, invented in China, eventually reached the West, transforming written communication. Traveling along the Silk Road was extremely harsh. Caravans traversed the Taklamakan Desert, known as the place from which no one returns. Fierce sandstorms could bury travelers alive. Bandits waited in isolated mountain passes, and the tremendous distance spanning thousands of miles from Qiangan, now Xi'an, to cities such as Samarkand or Antioch tested the endurance of all who attempted the journey. The journey often required several months or even a few years to complete. Explorers depended on oases where small commercial cities thrived, like vibrant gems scattered across the desert. Places such as Dunang, Kashgar, and MV served as key hubs. No single kingdom governed the entire passage. Instead, it was sustained by a mosaic of kingdoms, tribes, and city-states, each overseeing parts of the path and levying taxes on travelers. Yet, despite its intricate nature, this system functioned smoothly, weaving a network of links that transformed the ancient world. The Silk Road was far from a solitary path. It acted more like a circulatory system that circulated life, ideas, and aspirations across vast lands. Though enormous challenges arose from deserts, rivers, and seas, the Persian Empire adopted a unique method. They constructed extensive, sturdy, and well-kept roads not merely for moving soldiers or merchandise. For the Achaemenid Persians, roads symbolized the framework of the empire itself, serving to unite a diverse collection of conquered territories, languages, and cultures into an integrated whole. Central to this grand design was the royal road commissioned by Alex the Great in the 5th century before the Common Era. Spanning more than 1,500 miles from Susair, in Persia, to Sardis near the Aegean Sea, this thoroughfare linked the empire's eastern and western reaches. It allowed couriers, traders, and military commanders to cover immense distances with remarkable speed. Supported by a network of relay stations stocked with fresh horses and provisions, royal envoys could traverse the entire length of the road within only 7 to 9 days. This accomplishment was truly impressive. This achievement was remarkable for its era. To put it in perspective, an ordinary traveler or a caravan would require about 3 months to complete the journey. Yet the route was not only rapid but also secure. Patrols, fortified posts, and checkpoints guaranteed protection for individuals traveling under the king's authority. People from various parts of the empire, ranging from Babylonian scribes to Greek diplomats, utilized this royal roadway not merely to transport goods, but also to exchange ideas, rumors, and political messages. In many respects, it served as the empire's main channel for information flow. The Persian Empire's network of roads extended beyond this royal route, connecting major cities such as Ekbatana, Persepolis, and Babylon, and reaching toward regions like Egypt, India, and Central Asia. Way stations known as caravanserais provided rest and supplies for tired merchants and travelers. These establishments would later become essential elements for journeys along Islamic trade routes and the Silk Road centuries later. More than simply infrastructure, these Persian roads embodied the ambition to unify diverse territories not by sheer force but through fostering connections. By introducing uniform currency, measurements, and official languages, the Persians facilitated easier interaction, commerce, and involvement in the empire's economy. In a world where travel was often slow and disorderly, Persia presented something innovative: structure, regulation, and a system designed specifically for extended travel. To sum up, the Persians did not only govern an empire, they constructed its framework. This is something the Greeks, who were not known for building empires, did not achieve. Not in the classic sense, at least not at the beginning. What they truly were, however, was immensely inquisitive. From Herodotus to Pytheas, Greek explorers journeyed through the ancient world seeking understanding, commerce, and at times, pure amazement. For them, exploration was not always about domination. It was a method to pose questions, gather tales, and chart the unknown. One of the earliest and most intriguing adventurers was Pytheas of Massalia, now known as Marseille. Around 325 years before the Common Era, he sailed beyond familiar waters through the Straits of Gibraltar, traveling up the Atlantic coastline and reportedly reaching a mysterious northern territory he called Thu. Many experts think he may have reached places like Iceland or Norway. He spoke of unusual sights such as the midnight sun and frozen oceans, phenomena that Mediterranean audiences believed were mere legends. Yet Pytheas was no fabricator. He was a scientist driven by a sailor's passion. At the same time, in the eastern Mediterranean, Greek traders and thinkers moved through Egypt, Persia, and India. The conquests of Alex the Great in the 4th century, before the Common Era, opened the Greek world dramatically, ushering in the Hellenistic period during which Greek became the common language from Athens to Bactria. Cities like Alexandria, Antioch, and Susia turned into vibrant hubs for trade and cultural exchange. Traveling ceased to be a rare occasion and became a regular expectation. Then came the Romans, masters of engineering and empire. The Romans not only embraced travel, but literally built the pathways for it. Their renowned network of roads facilitated movement and connection across vast lands, reshaping how people experienced the world. Cities throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East were linked by an extensive network. At its height, the Roman Empire possessed more than 250,000 miles of roads, including over 50,000 miles of stone-paved highways. Roads such as the Via Appia, constructed in 312 BCE, were remarkable engineering accomplishments intended to endure, with many still remaining today. These roads primarily served military purposes, allowing legions to move swiftly to suppress uprisings. But they also supported trade, mail delivery, pilgrimages, and even leisure travel. Wealthy Romans ventured to Greek temples, Egyptian pyramids, and spa resorts in Gaul. Travel guides and personal travel stories gained popularity as reading material. For Romans, journeying was not only functional, it was a symbol of status. Roads demonstrated the empire's expanse. If a thoroughfare reached your city, it signified your importance. With every mile constructed of stone, Rome transformed how the ancient world perceived distance and connectivity. While terrestrial paths such as the Silk Road facilitated caravans across deserts and mountain ranges, there existed another equally vast ancient network spanning the waters of the Indian Ocean. This was the maritime Silk Route connecting harbors from East Africa to India and from the Arabian Peninsula to Southeast Asia. Long before sailing vessels dominated, seafarers mastered monsoon winds, crossing immense distances and turning the ocean into a global trading hub. The secret lay in the monsoon winds, predictable seasonal currents that change direction halfway through the year. Early sailors learned to navigate these winds with perfect timing. Venturing with the winds toward the east occurred when they blew from Africa, and toward the west when they shifted direction. Understanding this allowed vessels to confidently navigate the vast ocean, accomplishing journeys that once appeared beyond reach. Traders from India journeyed from Gujarat and the Tamil coastline, exporting spices, fabrics, precious stones, and ivory. In exchange, they brought in horses, fragrant resins, gold, and even rare animals. Merchants from Arab lands, hailing from ports such as Aden and Oman, transported goods to and from the Persian Gulf region, while East African traders in cities like Sofala exchanged ivory and tortoise shells. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Greek and Roman vessels reached Indian harbors like Barbaricum and Musaris, completely bypassing traditional overland paths. A Roman period navigation guide called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea detailed the bustling port cities, the commodities traded, and the routes the sailors took throughout the Indian Ocean. This guide was no mere theory, but a practical handbook for managing international trade. However, the ocean was more than a commercial thoroughfare. It served as a conduit for cultural exchange. Buddhism traveled from India to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia along these maritime routes. Later, Islamic merchants spread their religion across the Indian Ocean, transforming coastal societies in East Africa and the Malay archipelago. Unlike the frequently war-driven continental empires, the Indian Ocean functioned as a realm of peaceful interaction and shared growth. The ocean trading system flourished through diversity and mutual support. Harbors became vibrant centers where languages, beliefs, and cuisines blended together. A Tamil trader, a Swahili sailor, a Yemeni religious leader, and a Chinese envoy could all engage in commerce within the very same port. In these ancient waters, the currents carried far more than vessels. They transported entire civilizations. Yet, not every ancient voyage was motivated by commerce, conflict, or conquest. For countless individuals, the strongest motivation to travel was faith. Sacred locations, holy rivers, and distant shrines attracted pilgrims across vast lands, often demanding great personal sacrifice in the pursuit of healing, wisdom, or blessing. These journeys were never mere leisure trips. They represented spiritual challenges, expressions of heartfelt devotion in action. In ancient India, pilgrimage played a vital role in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. People ventured to immerse themselves in the sanctified waters of the Ganges, visit revered shrines such as Varanasi or Bodh Gaya, or ascend the towering Himalayas in search of secluded monastic retreats. These travels, frequently long and dangerous, were believed to cleanse one's karma and bring the traveler closer to spiritual freedom. Buddhist monks extended their pilgrimages beyond India as well, spreading their teachings along trading paths to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, China, and beyond. In Greece, many pilgrims journeyed to oracles like Delphi, where Apollo's priestess conveyed cryptic messages thought to offer divine guidance. Others sought healing at sanctuaries such as Epidaurus, where rituals and offerings were made to cure illnesses. These sacred travels served dual purposes. Social and economic occasions were closely linked with vendors, performers, and official ceremonies, turning pilgrimages into communal events. In the Roman Empire, religion was deeply connected with the identity of the state. Traveling to temples and imperial cult centers served as demonstrations of both religious devotion and political allegiance. Believers might visit the Temple of Asclepius seeking cures or journey to Jerusalem, which was then under Roman rule, as part of Jewish tradition, especially during holidays like Passover. Pilgrimage also played a vital role in Zoroastrian and Egyptian cultures. Ancient Persians made travels to fire temples, while Egyptians embarked on sacred journeys along the Nile to join in temple celebrations such as those at Abydos, thought to be the burial site of Osiris. Roads were cared for not only to serve armies and merchants, but also to accommodate the faithful. Shrines appeared along trade paths, while temples functioned as guest houses for pilgrims. Therefore, pilgrimages helped connect vast territories unified by common beliefs and sacred landscapes. Ultimately, these trips were more than mere physical movements. Embarking on a journey of devotion meant symbolically leaving behind one's ego, comforts, and attachments to return, changed. While the body traveled through the land, the soul ventured much deeper. By the time the ancient world transitioned into the medieval period, the groundwork for worldwide interconnectedness was already established. These routes were established not solely by emperors, but also by numerous travelers who dared to face the unknown. Merchants, pilgrims, explorers, and scholars intertwined a vast network of pathways both on land and across seas, combining sacred and commercial purposes, sometimes peaceful, and other times fraught with danger. Their legacy extends beyond mere footprints. They created a heritage of exchanging goods, ideas, beliefs, and technologies that shaped societies for many centuries. Travel fundamentally transformed everything. The dissemination of writing systems, such as the Phoenician alphabet, played a significant role in unifying communication across different regions. Religious movements, including Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and later Islam, expanded globally thanks to the persistent journeys of itinerant teachers and devoted followers. Indian spices enhanced Roman banquets, Chinese silk-clothed Parthian rulers, and African gold traversed the Red Sea to find its way into Persian wealth. However, travel also altered perceptions of the world itself. Ancient geographers, such as Erocenes, estimated the Earth's circumference with impressive precision using merely angles of the sun and reasoning. Strauss and Tommy charted continents based on indirect accounts and bold hypotheses. Even maps that were inaccurate represented progress toward a grander concept, an interconnected planet where faraway peoples were no longer myths, but real humans on varied paths. These routes, involving roads, rivers, and maritime channels, would eventually mature into the extensive trade networks characterizing the medieval and early modern eras. The Silk Road would eventually blend into the Islamic caravan networks. Roman pathways were traversed by Christian pilgrims. Knowledge of sailing across the Indian Ocean was passed down through Arab, Chinese, and later European seafarers. Perhaps most strikingly, the ancient passion for exploration, the desire to discover what lies beyond familiar borders, persists. Although the world today runs on engines and GPS, its essence still pulses with the curiosity that once inspired Phoenician sailors, Chinese caravans, and Egyptian envoys thousands of years ago. They lacked modern conveniences like passports, credit cards, or travel insurance. Yet they possessed courage, foresight, and an unwavering conviction that the lands beyond towering mountains, vast deserts, or endless seas were important. They believed the unknown waiting beyond the horizon was worth facing dangers for. Their conviction laid the foundation for a world connected not only by commerce or conquest, but fundamentally through the movement of people themselves.